One of the great chapters in all of the Bible, to me, is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And when I say 1 Corinthians 13, there are some of you that are immediately recognizing that that is the love chapter. And I think that within that chapter, there is one of the most beautiful, one of the most powerful descriptions and definitions of love that you can find really anywhere. The Apostle Paul wrote these words over these 4 verses. He says, love is patient. You know, if you love somebody, you'll cut them some slack. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. Love is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. Love does not rejoice about injustices, but rejoices when the truth wins out. Love never gives up, never loses faith, is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. You may remember this from maybe another translation of the Bible. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. Love never fails. I think that's a magnificent picture of love. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this section of 1 Corinthians 13. In fact, I've tried to boil it down, distill it down. And I think that if you could take this entire statement of love and boil it down to one word, the one word is action. In other words, love is action. Love is how you treat people. Love is not defined by feelings. If you look at this beautiful description, 4 verses of describing love, it's not a feeling in it. In American culture, we think of love as a feeling. I love you because I feel something when I'm around you, or I love you as long as I feel something toward you. But from a biblical perspective, when love is defined and described, it's described by how you treat each other, how you treat the other person. Love is patient. If you love somebody, you're going to cut them some slack. Love is kind. If you love somebody, you're going to treat them with kindness. Love is not rude. You know, if you love somebody, you're not going to say rude and mean and hurtful things to them. You know, when you look carefully, again, at the biblical description of love, it's not feelings. Love is all about action and how you treat the other person. Several years ago, and maybe it was 33 years ago or so, I read a book by a fellow named Willard Harley entitled His Needs, Her Needs. Now, I'm not going to say to you that this is the greatest book on relationships that I've ever read, but I will say it was one of the more provocative books on human relationships that I've ever read. Maybe, certainly at least thought-provoking. It is that kind of a book. But the basic thesis of this book is love is defined by how you meet the needs of your spouse. In other words, how you treat them. Love is action. Love is action. Harley wrote this, marriage is a complex relationship, perhaps the most intricate of them all. Unfortunately, most of us do not realize what we're getting into when we say, I do. I'll marry you. We think the dynamics of a good marriage depends on some mysterious blend of the right people, you know, or if a marriage turns badly, we call the two people wrong for each other. I love this statement. While it is true that two inherently incompatible people might marry, it's very unusual. In fact, he doesn't think compatibility is the most important characteristic for a successful marriage. Next 2 sentences are really key. More frequently, marital breakups occur when one or both parties lack the skills or awareness to meet each other's needs. Now, I want you to let that soak in for just a second. What causes marital breakups? It's when we have this obliviousness, or we lack the skills about simply meeting each other's needs, discovering what the needs are of your spouse and meeting those needs. More often than not, being right or wrong for someone depends not on some mysterious compatibility quotient, but on how willing and able you are to meet those needs, meet someone's needs, meet that someone's needs. So here's the key, the basic emphasis of the book. Do you know what your spouse needs from you? Are you aware of it? And are you willing to meet those needs? I mean, this is basic stuff. This is not rocket science, according to Willard Harley. It's not, have you found your soulmate? You know, we talk about soulmates nowadays like there's something mysterious. And if I can find my soulmate, everything will just naturally, automatically, like on autopilot work, and my marriage will be wonderful. Harley will shake his head to that. No. If you act like you naturally would act, you're probably going to be selfish. That's what's natural, is selfishness. That's what's, if we just do what feels natural, we're looking for what can I get. Willard Harley says, if you want to have a beautiful marriage, it's love as action. Love is how you treat them. Love has to be built. You know, love is something that needs to be developed. Love is something that will grow. It needs to be nurtured so that it can grow. And it's something that takes place over time. And it's really determined by how you treat that other person. Love that you feel is going to be really a result of love that is demonstrated, love that is acted out. You know, the love that you experience is in how you treat the other person. In other words, love is patience. Love is kind. Love is not self-seeking. You know, love doesn't keep a record of wrong. It's all about how you treat the other person. And again, you can grow in love or you can grow out of love by how you treat the other person. Your love will become more beautiful, more special as you treat that person lovingly, and your love will become diminished if you do mean things, if you treat them if you ignore them, it doesn't have to be something mean. It can be, you just forget. You forget your marriage, anniversary. Whatever, you see what I'm saying? So, this is not crazy, hard stuff, except this is the pathway to building a beautiful relationship. Willard Harley goes on in the book, and I've always thought this is a fantastic, imagery of marriage. He said, marriage is like a love bank. Love is like a bank. And everybody, I don't care who you are, married or not, everybody has a love bank. You have a love bank. And what happens is we are constantly in our interactions with people making deposits or withdrawals from each other's love banks by how we treat one another. You know, if I give my wife flowers, if I take her to a nice restaurant for a meal, if I seek to please her or romanticize her or serve her or help her or whatever, if I do good things, I'm making deposits into her bank, her love bank. But when I ridicule her, when I forget her, when I cause pain for her, I'm making withdrawals from the love bank, her love bank. And the simple point that Willard Harley makes is, if you're going to have a successful marriage, you can't make more withdrawals than you can make deposits. Everybody makes withdrawals. I said in last week's message, when two people get married, two sinners are getting married, and we are going to hurt each other. That's just going to be a part of life. And every time I hurt somebody or I hurt my wife, I'm making a withdrawal from her love bank. your marriage can sustain withdrawals as long as there are enough deposits being made. As long as I'm being loving and kind and patient, deposits are being made and the relationship will go on. I think what Willard Harley says that is so true is that one of the simple keys to a successful and happy marriage is simply knowing, what does my spouse need from me? And am I willing to do it? Do you know what your spouse needs from you? And have you ever asked that question? Now, this doesn't work unilaterally. In other words, this doesn't work if one person in the marriage is sacrificial and loving and caring, and the other person is just a selfish, lazy bum. No, it doesn't work in situations like that. But I'm telling you, when you get both parties, both persons, understanding what the other person needs and meeting those needs, you will find that your marriage is a thing of beauty. In fact, it will begin to look like the biblical picture of marriage that we see in Ephesians chapter 5. I've thought for a long time that one of the best pictures of a good and healthy marriage that you find anywhere in one passage in the Bible, it's Ephesians chapter 5 verses 21 through 33. That whole section. But let me just show a couple of 3 verses from that section. In Ephesians 5 verse 22, it says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord." Now what that means is, wives, you need to learn how to please your husbands in the same way that you'd want to please Jesus. Just as you want to honor Jesus and serve Jesus and do good things to build the kingdom of God in this world, take that energy and direct it also toward your husbands. Love your husbands, serve your husbands, take care of your husbands, bless your husbands, encourage your husbands. All the things that you'd want to do to strengthen your relationship with God. What Paul is saying here, take that submissive attitude and take it to your husband as well. But then you drop down a couple of verses to verse 25, and he shifts the camera lens now on husbands. He says, "Husbands, I want you to love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy." Do you see what this is saying? Husbands, just as Jesus was willing to die on the cross for us, you need to take your love, your loving sacrifice, and find out ways to give up your rights. Maybe you're not going to go hunting this next week during deer season every day, all week, because your wife has a need. That may be a very unpopular statement to make this week. Husbands, love your wives sacrificially. Wives, love your husbands in ways in which you seek to please them and lift them and bless them and help them. Notice it doesn't say, husbands, force your wives to submit to you. No. It doesn't say, husbands, dominate your wives until they do everything you want them to. No. And it doesn't say, wives, henpeck your husbands until you can get them to do things for you. No. It's not about nagging. It's not about forcing or coercing. This passage, what it's saying is, if you want to have a beautiful marriage, voluntarily from you, there needs to come from the wives this desire to please your husbands, from husbands this desire to sacrifice and serve your wives. I think this passage is best understood when you see the first verse in this whole section, verse 21. Paul is writing to the church and he's saying, in general, this is to be the attitude that defines the Christian church, that Christians submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So this is a general principle for all Christians. And then he says, wives, I want you to be this way to your husbands, and husbands, I want you to be this way to your wives. You see, a lot of us, we enter marriage from a selfish perspective, and we're thinking, Finally, I'm going to have somebody that's going to take care of me. Finally, I'm going to have somebody that's going to cook for me. Finally, I'm going to have somebody that's going to take me on special trips and going to make my life feel good. No. When you approach marriage from a consumeristic perspective, see what I can get that's going to make me feel good, you're going to be disappointed. Marriage that is beautiful, marriage that is most meaningful to everybody that's involved, is when both husband and wife are voluntarily submitting to and loving each other sacrificially. And that comes from their heart. And that's what makes and builds a beautiful marriage. It's how you treat each other. It's loving them in a 1 Corinthians 13 kind of way. And so let me ask you this question. I think this is a really important question that couples can ask each other this week. Sit across the table from each other or sit on the couch looking at each other. I don't care where you do it. But ask your spouse, what are 2 things you wish I did more of? Just ask that question. It's gonna generate, I think, some good conversation. If I could make your life better, what could I do for you? Figure out what your spouse needs and do it. It's not rocket science. It's basic kinds of stuff. So in closing, what I want you to think of, I want you to think of marriage like a garden. I mean, how do you get a garden like this? It's not, well, I guess you could hire a company and they could come in and put this up in a day or two. But a beautiful marriage is like a garden, not like sod, and it's not like potted full-grown flowers and shrubs that you buy and have them put in by some horticultural company. Marriage is like a garden where the ground has to be plowed and prepared, and seed has to be planted, and then it has to be watered, and you need to put in some fertilize, to help things grow, and you'll need to de-weed from time to time. You have to monitor it, watch it, and maybe there's bugs get into it. You have to debug parts of it. And maybe there'll come times you need to prune back or cut back things to keep it looking most beautifully. But when you do those things, you will create a garden that you will truly enjoy and experience together. Marriage is something that will always grow in stages. And so it is not usually now what it will be. You need to be patient with the process. Good marriages take work and attention on a daily basis. You have to look at the garden, watch the garden, care for the garden. If you notice something wrong with the garden, deal with it. But what's important is don't quit before the fruit ripens. A lot of times we're not getting what we think we ought to get. I'm not getting what I deserve in this relationship. And so we quit. And we think, well, I see that person over there. That's going to be a better garden. Well, when you go and start to build a relationship with that person, you're starting all over again with bare ground. And ground's got to be prepared, and it's got to be planted and watered. It's not always easier and better to quit and go over there. Sometimes just fix what needs to be fixed right here. Here's the deal. This is the point. I think the passage that Paul has given us here in Ephesians chapter 5 is a beautiful picture for how we need to live our relationships as husbands and wives. Wives, I want you to come to this place where you, from your own heart, decide, I want to give to my husband whatever I can to enrich him, to encourage him, to make him feel better about himself, to make him feel more like a man, more alive. I want to invest in my husband in the same way that I want to invest in my relationship with the Lord. And husbands, I want you to come to the place where you love your wives sacrificially, just as Jesus loved the church and died for us. That husbands, you're willing to give up your preferences, your rights, your money, your time, your energy. You give up what you need to make your wife a more beautiful person, a more holy person, that their life will be enriched because they are married to you. How you doing? This I think is the picture and the pattern for a beautiful relationship with a husband and a wife. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you'll take this kind of a basic sermon. It's not rocket science. This is simple stuff. There are people that may be listening to this sermon today whose marriages are struggling, not because they're incompatible. They're struggling because they've stopped loving each other. They've stopped serving each other. They've become selfish and they're navel gazers and they're just thinking about what can I get and when am I going to get mine? They become self-centered. Lord, I pray that you'll set us free from the natural selfishness that is a part of our lives and help us to begin to love one another in a way that reflects your kingdom, that is exactly the way you'd want us to treat one another.